Sometimes change does not arrive like thunder in a clear sky. It comes as a quiet shift within. You wake up in the morning, move through your usual routine, look at the world around you, and suddenly you catch yourself feeling that the air is different. Everything seems to be in place. Houses are standing. Roads still lead where they always have. People are going about their business. Yet inside, a strange sensation begins to grow, as if something is ending, as if an entire era is fading away, even though no one has officially announced its conclusion. Many people feel this. It is not always loud. It can be almost invisible. It shows up as fatigue with old conversations, old ambitions, old promises. What once inspired you now feels empty. What once seemed stable begins to crumble before your eyes. And the most unsettling part is this. It is not happening only to individuals. It is happening to entire systems, to familiar ways of living, to structures that for years felt unquestionable and permanent. It is as if the world has changed its rhythm. Old rules no longer function. Old authorities lose their power. Old structures that once promised order and safety reveal their cracks. Along with this comes a growing collective anxiety, not because everyone understands the reasons, but because everyone senses it. The ground beneath our feet is no longer as solid as it once was. People grow more restless. Attention scatters. The heart feels tired. There is too much information, yet clarity does not increase. Outside there is noise, inside there is emptiness. Many feel alone even when surrounded by others. They stand side by side, but not truly together. They speak, but do not hear. They smile, but do not feel. And then a frightening question arises. What is wrong with me? Or perhaps more honestly, what is wrong with this world? Slowly you begin to realize that this is not a personal crisis of one individual. It is a symptom of the times. It feels as though humanity itself is experiencing an inner fever, as if we have entered a period where the old no longer holds, and the new has not yet taken shape. And it is precisely this in-between state that creates anxiety. We do not like standing between worlds. But consider this. Why do so many people feel disconnected? Why are familiar structures collapsing or losing trust? Why does chaos so often appear before major transformation? Why, in moments when everything seems to be falling apart, does a new clarity unexpectedly awaken within some individuals? What if this is not simply collapse? What if it is transition? You may have already seen something similar in nature. The darkest moment comes before dawn. Before spring, the earth appears lifeless. Before a butterfly emerges, the caterpillar disappears. If you focus only on the surface, it looks like destruction. But if you look deeper, you see transformation. That is why it is so important not to rush to conclusions, not to label everything that is happening as an end, if it may in fact be a beginning. Yes, there is instability. Yes, much feels frightening. Yes, the familiar world is losing its shape. But perhaps what we are witnessing is not death, but the shedding of old skin, not the end of life, but the end of an old way of living. If we step back from personal emotions and look at history as a whole, one thing becomes clear. Humanity has never moved in a straight line. It has always evolved in waves. Rise, flourishing, stagnation, decline, and then rise again. This rhythm repeats over and over, like breathing. Think of the great civilizations of the past. Powerful empires that seemed eternal. Their cities shone with brilliance. Their knowledge astonished the world. Their armies inspired fear. They built temples, established laws, shaped culture. And at a certain point, no one doubted that it would last forever. But nothing remains forever in a single form. Ancient Egypt passed through magnificence and collapse. The Roman Empire, whose power once stretched across half the known world, eventually ceased to be the center. The civilizations of Mesoamerica, ancient Greece, Byzantium, each had its golden age and its sunset. And every time, the people living within those eras felt as if the world itself was falling apart. Yet from a distance it becomes obvious, it was not the world that was collapsing. It was the form through which it expressed itself that was changing. One phase was ending, and another was beginning. This rhythm is not visible only in human history. It is present throughout nature. Day turns into night. Autumn shifts into winter. A seed must break open in order to become a sprout. Even within our own bodies, cells are constantly being born and dying. Life sustains itself through renewal, and renewal is impossible without the completion of the old. The night is always darkest before dawn. This is not merely poetic language, it is the law of cycles. At the deepest point of darkness, movement toward the light has already begun. The eye simply cannot see it yet. If we accept that the world moves in cycles, if we recognize that destruction is not a mistake but part of the process, then an important thought emerges. Perhaps what we perceive as an ending is the completion of a great historical arc. Perhaps humanity has reached saturation within an old model of existence. Every cycle lasts only as long as it fulfills its purpose. When a form no longer matches inner development, it begins to crack. Not because evil has won, but because life demands the next step. Consider this. If cycles exist in nature and in history, might they also exist in consciousness? Could collective human awareness move through stages of birth, growth, crisis, and transformation? Could our present condition be not merely a social crisis, but a transition into a new level of perception? And if that is so, then another question arises. What exactly is ending? What do we truly mean when we speak of the old world? Because this is not only about politics, economics, or technology. It is about something far deeper. The very way we perceive reality itself. When we speak about the old world, many imagine ruined buildings, political crises, shifts of power, or economic instability. But the old world is not geography and not a map of nations. It is a state of consciousness. It is a way of perceiving oneself and others. It is the inner program by which humanity has lived for centuries. The old world was built around the idea of the external success, external power, external status. A person's value was measured by what could be seen, counted, compared. Wealth, influence, recognition, these became the main reference points. Gradually, inner depth gave way to outer form. Materialism became the dominant worldview. Only what could be touched was considered real. Only what could be measured was considered valid. The soul, intuition, inner experience, all of this was pushed aside or ridiculed. A person began to identify with a role, a profession, a social position. And the further this went, the more connection was lost with who one truly is. At the same time, division intensified. Us and them, belonging and exclusion, right and wrong. The world fragmented into opposing camps. Fear became a tool of control. Systems built on competition and domination grew stronger. People were taught that they must fight for a place under the sun, that resources are scarce, that security can only be achieved through superiority. Gradually, fear became the background of everyday life. Fear of losing a job, fear of not being enough, fear of rejection, fear of appearing weak. And to cope with this fear, people began searching for validation outside themselves. Likes, applause, approval, a constant race to prove, I am worthy. But inside, emptiness was growing. Hyperconsumption became the norm. More things, more information, more entertainment, more stimulation, and at the same time, less silence, less awareness, less genuine human connection. People could be endlessly busy and yet deeply unsatisfied. They could possess much and still feel that something essential was missing. The collective psyche grew tired. Tired of noise, tired of tension, tired of constantly trying to meet external expectations, tired of living on the surface. And within this exhaustion lies the key. The old world begins to collapse, not because someone decided to destroy it. It collapses because it has exhausted itself from within. Its principles no longer provide meaning. They no longer nourish the soul. When a paradigm begins to crack, it first feels like chaos. But in truth, it is the clearing of space. When an old shell no longer fits, it starts to break apart. It is painful, it is frightening, but it is natural. And in these fractures, in these cracks of old consciousness, something new begins to emerge, still fragile, still undefined, but already perceptible. When a person becomes tired of the external, the search for the internal begins. When old answers no longer work, new questions arise. And this is how awakening begins. When the old system of reference begins to fall apart, space appears within consciousness. And in that space, questions arise that were not there before. People increasingly begin to reflect not only on how to live, but why to live. Not only on career, but on meaning. Not only on comfort, but on depth. One of the most visible signs is the growing interest in spirituality. Not blind belief, but personal experience. People begin seeking practices that help them feel themselves from within. Meditation, conscious breathing, attention training, the study of ancient traditions, all of this stops being something distant and becomes part of a personal search. A person no longer wants to simply believe the words of authorities. They want to experience truth directly. Doubt begins to emerge, and this is an important stage. Doubt no longer destroys, it purifies. People start asking questions of structures that once seemed untouchable. They no longer accept information automatically. They learn to discern. At the same time, sensitivity increases. What once passed unnoticed now creates a response. Injustice is felt more sharply. Lies are recognized more quickly. Falsehood becomes almost physically uncomfortable. Many notice that they have become more intuitive. They sense subtle signals, feel the atmosphere, perceive intentions beneath words. Within, a quiet call toward authenticity appears. A desire to be oneself, even when it is inconvenient. A refusal to play roles that no longer align with inner truth. People begin changing jobs, environments, lifestyles, not because it is fashionable, but because continuing as before becomes impossible. It is important to understand, spiritual awakening does not mean escaping reality. It is not a retreat into fantasy. It is an expansion of perception. It is the ability to see more layers of what is happening. It is a return to the inner center that has always existed, but was long drowned out by noise. Personal awakening reflects a collective process. When one person becomes more conscious, their response to the world changes. When many people begin this shift, the atmosphere of society itself begins to transform. This is not always immediately visible, but it can be felt. Awakening, however, is rarely gentle. It often begins with crisis, with disappointment, with the collapse of illusions, with the moment when the previous picture of the world can no longer withstand reality, and then a person passes through an inner night. The same process unfolds within humanity as a whole. Before the birth of new consciousness, there is a confrontation with the shadow, and this stage cannot be ignored, because it is precisely this phase that is now becoming especially visible. Every awakening begins not with light, but with shadow. When consciousness expands, it inevitably encounters what has long been hidden. This is true for an individual, for entire nations, and for civilization as a whole. Today we are witnessing how what once remained in the shadows is coming to the surface. Corruption, manipulation, deception, abuse of power, none of this appeared overnight. It has existed for a long time, but before, it was either disguised or overlooked. Now, much of it is becoming visible, and this visibility creates shock, outrage, anger, disillusionment. People feel as though they are losing their foundation. Illusions collapse. Those who were trusted reveal their imperfections. Structures that seemed solid show their fragility. It can feel as if the world itself is growing darker. But it is important to understand one thing. The world has not necessarily become darker. The darkness has become more visible. When a light is turned on in a room, the dust becomes apparent. This does not mean there is more of it. It simply is no longer hidden. In the same way, collective consciousness is now illuminating its own shadow. In psychology, there is the concept of shadow integration. It describes the process in which a person stops denying their suppressed aspects and begins to recognize them. Fear, aggression, envy, pain, not to justify them, but to stop being unconsciously controlled by them. Humanity is moving through a similar stage. We see polarization, we see conflict, we see emotional surges. Old contradictions rise to the surface. People divide, argue, accuse one another. It is a painful process, but it is also a cleansing one. As long as the shadow is suppressed, it governs from within. When it becomes conscious, the possibility of transformation appears. That is why the dark night is not punishment, but transition. It is the phase in which illusions dissolve to make space for a more mature perception. Many feel exhausted by the news, by tension, by constant instability. This is a natural reaction. But if we look deeper, it becomes clear. A large-scale restructuring is taking place. Old mechanisms can no longer function as they once did. Their weaknesses have become too obvious to ignore. After destruction, there is always a moment of choice. Either we cling to dying forms out of fear, or we allow new principles to be born. And within that choice lies the key to the next stage. Because after the dark night, dawn inevitably follows. Once the shadow is exposed, the formation of new consciousness begins. And it is already emerging, quietly but steadily. When an old structure begins to collapse, the first sensation is loss. But if this stage is lived through completely, beyond it a new space opens. And within that space, a new perception slowly begins to form. New consciousness does not arrive as a revolution with flags and slogans. It emerges from within. It reveals itself through shifting priorities, through a movement from external control to inner responsibility, through the realization that no human being is isolated, but deeply interconnected with the whole. A sense of unity begins to arise, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. People start to see that their actions affect others, that thoughts and emotions shape the atmosphere around them. That separation is an illusion sustained by fear. Gradually, the model of constant competition begins to lose its grip. Instead of asking who is right, the question becomes what is true. Instead of blame, there is a search for understanding. Instead of striving for dominance, there is a movement toward cooperation. This does not happen everywhere at once, but the direction is already noticeable. New consciousness is connected to inner maturity. A person stops placing responsibility for their life entirely on external circumstances. They begin to see where they act out of fear and where they act out of awareness. They notice their reactions and consciously choose to transform them. An inner foundation develops. What happens externally becomes less destabilizing because the center of stability shifts inward. This is the transition from survival to purpose, from constant anxiety to a sense of meaning, from living for approval to living from depth. Humanity is gradually moving from an ego-centered model toward a more soul-centered one. The ego seeks to defend and to prove. The soul seeks to connect and to create. The ego fears loss. The soul knows that what is essential cannot be taken away. That is why the new era is not primarily technological, but internal. It is not defined only by inventions. It is defined by the level of awareness, by the degree to which a person can recognize themselves as part of a greater whole and act from that understanding. And here the central question arises: if humanity is truly moving toward a new level, what role does each of us play in this transition? Are we merely observers of global change, or active participants in the birth of a new era? When we speak about the birth of a new era, it is easy to imagine something grand and distant, something unfolding at the level of governments, technologies, or global events. But the truth is that no era begins with a decree or a slogan. It begins within the individual. Awakening is never purely collective. It begins the moment you choose awareness over automatic reaction. When you notice your fear, but do not allow it to control you. When you take responsibility for your inner state instead of blaming the world. In the new era, the primary force is not control, but consciousness. This means that every inner step matters. Each time you choose honesty over a mask, you strengthen a new field of reality. Each time you respond from understanding rather than aggression, you participate in shaping a different world. It may sound simple, yet true power often hides within simplicity. In the old world, a person felt like a small cog in a vast machine. They were told that they had no real influence, that change could only come from above. But new consciousness transforms this perspective. Inner transformation reshapes the outer environment. This is not instant magic. It is a gradual shift in the field of interaction. When a person heals their wounds, they stop passing pain forward. When they become aware of their patterns, they stop unconsciously repeating them. And in this way, the fabric of relationships begins to change. Personal healing becomes a contribution to the collective. Working on yourself is not selfish. It is participation in the shared space. Your stability lowers the overall level of chaos. Your clarity reduces confusion. Your calm presence creates an island of balance. To live as a bridge between worlds means remembering the lessons of the old while acting from new understanding. It means not denying reality, yet not blindly submitting to it. It means maintaining your inner center, even during unstable times. The new era does not demand heroism in the traditional sense. It asks for presence, for honesty, for the courage to remain conscious in a world that is still learning how to be. And if enough individuals make this choice, a natural shift will occur. Not as an explosion, but as a sunrise. We began with the feeling that something is ending, with an inner sense of instability. And if we follow this journey to its conclusion, it becomes clear. Much is truly fading away. But this is not destruction, it's metamorphosis. When a caterpillar enters the cocoon, from the outside, it looks like a pause, like the disappearance of its former shape. Yet within, a complex process of restructuring unfolds. The old structure dissolves to make room for the new. If the caterpillar could judge the experience only by the breakdown of its old body, it might believe everything was over. But in truth, flight is beginning. Humanity stands at a similar threshold. A moment between what has been and what is still taking form. And yes, this transition brings uncertainty, but it also carries immense potential. Trust in the process is not blind naivety. It is an understanding of the laws of growth. Every era moves through completion, and each time, what follows is greater awareness. We are not living at the end of history. We are standing at the edge of a new chapter. Perhaps years from now, this period will be remembered as a time of profound awakening, a time when humanity faced its shadow and chose maturity. You are not merely observing this transformation. You are part of it. Your perception, your choices, your inner state. All of it shapes the collective direction. You are not a witness to an ending. You are a participant in a beginning. And if the world feels unstable right now, remember, the night is always darkest before dawn, but dawn is inevitable,